Welcome to Andy Staples on 3. It is a Tuesday, and have you named your starting quarterback yet? Because if you haven't, you're probably behind. It is that week. This is the week when coaches who have been holding out on naming a starting quarterback, even when we were pretty sure we knew who it was, or if we were not sure we knew who it was, this is when they start saying, yep, we're transitioning into game week. This is our starting quarterback. On Monday, USC coach Lincoln Riley named Miller Moss his starting quarterback. This was an interesting one because Miller Moss looked fantastic in the bowl game, but Lincoln Riley then went out and brought in a quarterback from the transfer portal, Jaden Mayava, who had been at UNLV last year, who was great as a freshman at UNLV last year. But it still seemed like Miller Moss was going to be the guy. They bring Miller Moss to Big Ten Media Days. It felt like he had command of the offense, respect to the teammates, all that good stuff. Now we get the official word. Miller Moss is USC's starting quarterback. It's an interesting story with Miller Moss because we've talked about this, how rare it is that the quarterbacks just stay. And sometimes if you just stay, you have a better chance of being the guy, as long as you are still making progress. I mean, there's situations where guys just aren't making progress. Like guy we're going to talk about in a second, Malachi Nelson, who was a signee at USC last year. He was a huge quarterback recruit, but it was very clear once he got on campus, he was never going to be the guy. So that one, they had to basically agree to disagree. He went elsewhere. With Miller Moss, he was the second QB in their 2021 class at USC. So that was Clay Helton's final class. The other QB in that class, Jackson Dart. And we talked about that with Ben Garrett yesterday from OM Spirit. Like, Jackson Dart has been at Ole Miss so long, it feels like Jackson Dart started at Ole Miss. But he did. He was at USC. He left because Caleb Williams was coming in. And that's what's so interesting with Miller Moss is, so he's there in 21. 22 is about to start. Caleb Williams is coming in. So you're not going to be the starting quarterback as long as Caleb Williams is there. And remember, when Caleb Williams transferred to USC, he had 3 years of eligibility remaining. You knew he wasn't going to use the last one. So you knew he was going to be the starter for 2 seasons. So Miller Moss was like, nope, I'm good. I'm going to stay. I'm going to back up Caleb Williams. Jake Jensen also signed in that class. 2023, Malachi Moore signs. Again, a big-time recruit. When he signs, you're thinking, oh, this is the guy who's supposed to replace Caleb Williams. It became pretty clear once he got there that he wasn't going to. But then they bring in Jaden Mayava after this past offseason, and it's like, okay, you sure? You sure? Well, Miller Moss is sure. He is USC's starting quarterback, and USC has a bear of a schedule. They start out with LSU. Now, we don't know if LSU's defense is going to be any better. So Miller Moss may be slicing and dicing in game one. We'll find out. Garrett Nussmeier, LSU's quarterback, similar situation where he sat behind Jaden Daniels, waited. It's a lot of parallels in this game. You got Lincoln Riley and Brian Kelly who left Oklahoma and Notre Dame on the same day to go to these schools. You have quarterbacks who sat behind transfers who won the Heisman Trophy and waited their turn. Garrett Nussmeier waited his turn at LSU. Miller Moss waited his turn at USC. You have defenses that were terrible last year that they hope are going to be better. We'll find out. But if LSU's defense isn't much better, Miller Moss could be carving it up. Now, game 3 is Michigan. I can tell you right now, that defense is still going to be very good. They lost some players for the national title team. They did not lose all of them, and they did not lose the best ones. That one's going to be tough. So Miller Moss will be challenged early for sure. But as you can see, he's a very patient person. He has stuck it out. He is now USC's starting quarterback. Other starting quarterback news. On Monday, Duke named Maalik Murphy its starting quarterback. The Blue Devils got Maalik Murphy from Texas. Remember, he started the BYU and Kansas State games for Texas last year when Quinn Ewers was hurt. He was the breakout star of the 2023 Texas spring game, but it was very clear Arch Manning was going to be the backup this season. So Maalik Murphy had to find another place. He is now the Duke starting quarterback. Manny Diaz's first year as the head coach at Duke. And this will be interesting to see how he does, because he's one that kind of wowed us in that spring game. He was all right in his 2 starts. They almost lost that K-State game. K-State was obviously very good. So Maalik Murphy, now a year older, he is your starter at Duke. Other quarterbacks who've been named, we had Washington State named John Mateer, the starting quarterback. He was the backup to Cam Ward last season. Meanwhile, Danny O'Neal named the starting quarterback at San Diego State. Now, he was officially named on Monday. The San Diego Union Tribune reported it on Sunday night. But Danny O'Neal is the first true freshman in the history of the program to start the season opener at QB. So Danny O'Neal's story is interesting. He was going to Colorado. He was committed to Colorado. He was following Sean Lewis. Sean Lewis was the OC at Colorado. Remember, he'd been the head coach at Kent State before that. So he becomes the OC at Colorado. Danny O'Neal commits to him there. Deion Sanders decides about 3/4 of the way through last season, it's not working out, demotes Sean Lewis. Sean Lewis leaves, becomes the head coach at San Diego State. Danny O'Neal follows him there, signs with him. He's now the starting quarterback, beat out Florida State transfer A.J. Duffy. And as I remember, this is one of those things that you got to pay attention to. And we're going to mention Malachi Nelson again in 1 second. Sometimes the higher rated prospect, it's just not going to work out, or it doesn't work out at stop 1, at stop 2. Sometimes the recruiting rankings don't get it right with QBs. And I realize I say that as someone who works for one of the sites that does the recruiting rankings, but it's true. QB is a very hit or miss position. So O'Neal is going to start at San Diego State. Elsewhere in the Mountain West, at Boise State, Maddox Madsen is your starting QB. Now, I said Malachi Nelson went elsewhere from USC. Where did he go? He went to Boise State. But he got beat out by Maddox Madsen. And it just tells you sometimes the recruiting rankings don't always get it right. Now, in the aggregate, they do. Overall, they do. But individually, they don't always do it. So Maddox Madsen is your starter at Boise State. We now are waiting on a few other quarterback competitions. We're waiting on Maryland. See what Mike Loxley decides. Billy Edwards Jr., MJ Morris, Cameron Edge. North Carolina, still waiting on that one. Michigan, probably the biggest, highest profile quarterback competition still going on. Alex Orji Davis Warren and Jack Tuttle. We will find out, because it is time to start making these decisions. Now, perhaps Sharon Moore doesn't tell us what his decision is. Perhaps he just puts somebody out there game 1. But if they're going to tell us, this week's probably the week they're going to tell us. So pay attention, keep your eyes peeled, stay tuned. There will probably be a few more of these. But right now, we have a very special treat for you. Very special treat. My friends Dan Rubenstein and Ty Hildenbrandt from the Solid Verbal Podcast join. We play a little game called Two Truths and a Lie. You've probably played this. It's a party game, icebreaker. We're going to break the ice on this college football season. And this one has a potential to get very fun, because I made up all the statements. They could all be lies. But if you have to pick 2 truths, it is going to make you think very critically about this upcoming season and realize how unpredictable all this could be. The truth in the chat. If I'm Sharon Moore, I wouldn't tell anyone anything. Keep Fresno State guessing. Yes. Because if Fresno State doesn't know who the starting quarterback is, they'll most assuredly lose to Michigan. I'm pretty sure Sharon Moore could buy a billboard in Fresno announcing his starting quarterback so that the Fresno State Bulldogs know exactly who it is, and they would still lose. But That's just a wild guess. Just a wild guess. But when you have Kenneth Grant and Mason Graham, Will Johnson, that's how it's going to go with certain opponents. All right, now it is time to play a little Two Truths and a Lie 2024 College Football Edition. This is a very special day here at Andy Staples On 3 because it's not often we have pioneers on the show, but these are some pioneers. Dan Rubenstein and Ty Hildenbrandt, the hosts of the Solid Verbal podcast, the original college football podcast. They had a podcast when nobody knew what a podcast was. They did this thing for like 3 years before they ever met in person.
That's true.
Gentlemen, look at what you've created, an entire industry.
Yeah, that's us. That's us. Yeah, all of that is factually true. Andy and I and Ty and Andy, like we've known each other before Ty and I met our wives because of the digital college football work we've done in podcasting and video, writing, everything like that. So yeah, it's weird that we're pioneers and we're 28, all three of us, but
yeah,
you know, it's a new landscape. It's a new world.
I mean, we were all in high school when we started doing this stuff.
That's true.
It's just truly amazing.
The original TikTokers. Yeah.
But it's funny how all this has worked because when it started, the idea of terrestrial radio was still very dominant. It actually still is because there's a lot of old people who haven't figured how to use their phones yet. But satellite radio had just started. Nobody thought, what are these little on-demand shows? Who's gonna listen to that? And now it's a significant portion of the population that this is how we get our audio. And you know, for you guys, you've created this incredible community of verballers. I'm curious, when did you realize there's this group of people that are listening to everything we do that now get all the jokes that are kind of family?
I had a couple of different instances, and I think both may go back to my wife. Like at a live show, people were like talking to her about her experiences at Michigan. And you're like, how did they know I went to Michigan? Like, oh, these people kind of know us in a really good way. But like, there was another instance where a coworker of mine came on the show years and years ago, and she just came in to do picks as a non-college football fan at all. And then she was with her boyfriend and a friend of his, and she said, the friend said, wait, you're Katie the Capper? As if she were an important person because I randomly pulled in an old Vox Media coworker into the studio to do the show. And you feel these like reverberations where like Ty and I are just doing the show, speaking to each other and, you know, speaking to a wall. But like in public, it's happened. At games, it's happened. I've had somebody come up to me on the subway in New York saying, and pulling out an AirPod or whatever and saying, I'm listening to you right now. This is weird. So we've had those instances. But yeah, that has been the big thing that, you know, the real life, the IRL element of it is what sort of nailed everything home.
We had somebody come up to us at a live show that we did. I mean, we've been doing this show for a decade plus before we did anything on the road. And we had someone come up to us at one of our early New York shows that we did. Dan probably remembers this. And it was a listener who remembered almost verbatim what we talked about on a very specific episode on a very specific date that year in November. And it's like, do you remember what you said on the November 3rd episode? I was like, dude, I don't know what I had for lunch today, let alone what I talked about on that episode. But up until that point, you get emails from people. You have obviously a community out there that interacts with you. You know people are listening, but when they preposition you with it right in front of your face like that, it's a little bit of a different call. Yeah.
It's sort of like when our friend Ralph Russo from the Associated Press is 5 days behind and is texting me about something I said 5 days ago and arguing with me in real time. And I don't even remember saying it. So it is great. And it's so much fun. And that's the thing I love about you guys is it's always fun. So if you have not listened to Dan and Ty's most recent episode, and you may have one dropping between now and this is coming out
right.
on Tuesday morning. So, but you had an episode about Iowa where you took a deep dive into what has happened to Iowa's offense. Why is it the way it is? And I say this in the most complimentary way I can. It is like banging your head against a concrete wall in audio form.
Yeah.
And because that's the experience. Like, you bring in our friend Scott Docterman from The Athletic to explain exactly what's happened. And it is such a great educational piece that I understand so much better, like the roots of why Kirk Ferentz is the way he is, why things haven't changed, and what has to change now. Like, it's fascinating. And when we get into truths, and a lie, we're going to get into that, because there is a statement in Two Truths and a Lie in our Big Ten section that references Iowa that I will be curious to see after that episode. Has it changed your opinion?
The thing about it, Andy, and Dan was the one who initially came up with the idea to do something that unpacked Iowa and what it meant. What did it mean kind of over the last decade to see this decline in its offense? But as you know, it's been very easy to make the jokes about it online. It's been a punchline now for a few years running. And we did our best to kind of step back from that and talk to people who understood it on a deeper level to actually understand how it got here. The jokes are great. I'm sure those aren't going to go away anytime soon. Hopefully they will this season for the Iowa Hawkeye fans out there. But just to understand how it got here, to your point, yeah, we're hopeful that that can help educate people. I know it did for us.
It is amazing. Actually, let's start it, because when I come on with you guys, a lot of times you have a game for me. I came on in between in that limbo period right before I started it on 3, and we played a game called Sark Tank, where somebody would come in and give the pitch. One of us would be the Sark, like the shark on Shark Tank, and we would decide whether that was a viable pitch, whether we wanted to invest or not. This one is the similar conceit where it's a game we all know. The reason I picked this one, so my son started high school last year, and in one of his classes, they did a getting to know you thing, and it was Two Truths and a Lie. And it's funny because his school, most of these kids have been together since kindergarten. So you got to go real deep to get anybody to figure out or to fool anybody with your lie, because they know all each other's darkest secrets. So he's like going, I played basketball in 5th grade, trying to make somebody who doesn't realize he quit after 4th grade. Like, that's the hard part.
Super pedantic.
This one will be a little bit more open-ended, because I'm going to give you 3 statements. You tell me which one's the lie. We're speculating here. These all could be lies. These all could be true. But I tried to make it where you're going to have to think pretty critically to decide which one is the lie, and maybe stake out some place you don't want to stake out. But I'll start with the Big Ten, since we were just talking about Iowa.
Did you at all consider calling this Two Truths and a Tie? Because that's where my mind went.
See, you're so much better at branding than me.
It's my lone strength. Yeah.
Producer River, change the lower third. Two truths and a tie. Two truths and a tie. It is done. Yeah. I am so bad at branding. This is my downfall as a college football podcaster. Everybody else is better at branding than me.
Yeah, this is why we're a good fit together. Continue.
Exactly. All right. Two truths and a tie. The Big Ten. Oregon and Ohio State will play at least twice this season. Nebraska at Iowa will have college football playoff implications. USC will finish above 500 in Big Ten play. Ty Hildenbrandt.
Yeah.
Two truths and a tie. Which one's the tie?
Yeah, the lie is that Nebraska at Iowa will have playoff implications. And I know it pains me to say that. I apologize. But I really like Oregon and Ohio State. No great secret there. I don't even think that's a take. I think USC ultimately finishes 5 or 6 conference wins. I'm not crazy about USC, but I give them a little bit more credit than maybe some others out there. I just can't get to a place where we're sitting here on November the 29th and one of either Iowa or Nebraska is in serious playoff contention. I do think Iowa will be on the edge of that conversation, but it's a question of offense. It's a question of offense, no matter how many things Tim Lester has said in the offseason that has given us warm fuzzies and at least led us to believe that, yes, this is a guy who understands what needs to happen next in order to just move some things forward. I still think we're going to encounter these situations where we're banging our head against the wall. Iowa's offense is still not good enough to kind of get them over the hump. And especially now that it's a more crowded conference, I just think it's harder to find a pathway into that playoff if you're a team like Iowa, even with what I think looks like a fairly decent schedule. So unfortunately, for as much as I'd like to say it's not the lie, not the tie, I think
which is confusing. We're saying TY, not TIE, to be clear.
That's correct. Yeah, I would say that Nebraska,
especially with Iowa,
is the lie.
Right, it becomes confusing.
Yeah.
Okay.
Because they're the ones that would lobby the NCAA to reinstate ties and get rid of overtime. That's a very Iowa way of thinking.
Okay, so I'm going to clarify something and be, again, pedantic. So when you say Nebraska and Iowa has playoff implications, there's two ways to interpret that. One way is one of those teams will be like on the precipice, on the fringe of playoff consideration, or within the top 12 when they play and maybe fall out. The other way is that these could be data points for playoff teams that
I hadn't thought of it that way. I think we're going more the straightforward primary. One of these teams is in the mix.
Okay. I was going to say that, that you're looking at Ohio State's resume, that if Iowa loses to Nebraska, then that Iowa win doesn't look as good for Ohio State if they're being considered as an at-large team kind of thing. So I was going with the who was it? Pitt, that was squarely in the middle of all these different teams that played Pitt way back when we were considering.
Yeah, I think that's maybe a little too deep because
I know.
I don't know that it's gonna. If neither of them is in the mix for the playoff berth, I don't know it's gonna matter that much what everybody did against them.
I agree with you, but you know how this sport operates in November.
I do.
Where we're suddenly parsing every single moment.
They both played Oregon State, right?
Exactly. They won by 14. Yeah. The other team didn't have control. They only won by 7. And but that's the conversation. That's the weird sport that we all love and follow. So I'm going to say that as well, just because if you're going to say, we're going to consider a team with a true freshman quarterback who I think is going to look great at times, but I still think we'll have a flawed offense also at times. And you got to see it to believe it with Iowa's offense at the same time. And look, they've been top 12. They've been around there these past few years at times. But I think USC has enough now, especially on defense, adding a couple key Oregon State transfers, I think at linebacker and safety. There is something nice about having the receivers that they have. I still have some offensive line questions about them, but I think they can win more often than not with pop on offense in the Big Ten and some improvement on defense that they can go above 500.
Yeah, I mean, the problem with believing that Iowa could be part of this conversation is that you need to suspend reality and start believing that their offense is going to get better. And for me, I was drawing the comparison earlier when I was in the shower. I'm like, this is a lot like believing in UFOs, Andy, because we've got old evidence, strong evidence to suggest that, yes, it is real. It can be real. But with the wonders of modern technology, we need better 4K video.
Yes.
We need more serious people to also believe that this is a real thing until we actually see what Tim Lester does. And if Cade McNamara can hopefully do better this season than he did in his own scrimmage, I'm going to remain in a healthy, skeptical place and hopefully get to a point by the end of the year where we're talking about this whole thing in a different light.
Ty wants forensic burden of proof with the Iowa offense.
I understand that. It's kind of the way I feel about USC's defense.
Sure.
I need to see it. I've never seen a Lincoln Riley team with a good defense. The closest it came is 2020 at Oklahoma. Yeah. And I think we've learned enough now to know that nothing that happened in 2020 counts. So we've got to see that from him. But I will say, so I'm going to pick a different one than you guys, but I'm not saying that USC will finish above 500 in Big Ten play as a lie.
Okay.
I think that can be true because USC can go 6-6 and still be 5-4 in the Big Ten.
Yeah.
Their Big Ten schedule is actually somewhat manageable. They do have to play Michigan and Penn State, which is going to suck. But LSU and Notre Dame, I think, are more likely losses than anything on their Big Ten schedule other than Michigan game. So I think there's a chance they go 1-2 in the non-con, 5-4 in the Big Ten, and they're 6-6, and everybody's still mad. Or they could be 7-5, or they could be 8-4. I don't necessarily think they're going to be very good this year in the Big Ten, but the non-con is where they can take 2 losses. So I'm going to say that's not the lie. I'm going to say the lie is Oregon and Ohio State will play at least twice this season, which requires Nebraska and Iowa having college football playoff implications to be true. Producer River, please throw that Iowa schedule up on the screen.
So great. It is a great
Let's
schedule.
go through this. So, yes, there's at Ohio State. We're counting that as a loss. Iowa may be favored in every other Big Ten game.
Mm-hmm.
Every other Big Ten game. So, as long as they beat Iowa State and don't, drop one to Troy or Illinois State, then you are talking about a team that could be 11-1 or 10-2 at the end of the season and playing in the Big Ten championship game. If they they could be playing Nebraska for a spot in the Big Ten championship game, because they could be 8-1 with a loss to Ohio State in Big Ten play.
Sure.
Oregon could be 8-1 with a loss to Ohio State in Big Ten play. Or Oregon could have beaten Ohio State, could have the head-to-head against Ohio State.
And
maybe Ohio State.
Else.
Yeah. That's the thing.
You could have a weird three-way tie situation.
You have a three-way tie. How do you break the tie? Like, there's so many strains. We haven't even seen the tiebreakers yet. Like, the Big Ten and SEC still have not given us those tiebreakers yet. So I do think there's a possibility that Nebraska-Iowa is either Iowa trying to get an at-large or Iowa trying to get into the Big Ten title game, or at least get into the tiebreaker for the Big Ten title game. So if that happens and Iowa gets into the Big Ten title game, then we don't get a second Oregon-Ohio State in the Big Ten title game. Now, we might get it in the playoff, but I'd say there's less of a chance of that than in the title game. So we've already got some disagreements.
Yeah. And look, Iowa always loses to Northwestern, right? We know that.
Yep.
And that might have been a Pat Fitzgerald thing. He held the weird thing against Iowa.
But speaking of Northwestern and Iowa,
sure.
We mentioned Cade McNamara bad in the scrimmage.
Yeah.
Brendan Sullivan maybe Iowa's quarterback.
Yeah.
We don't know that.
Yeah, so there's that. Iowa's just going to lose something dumb or a couple things dumb in the Big Ten and still might have a crazy strong defense and lose, what was it, 12-10? Something like that to Minnesota last year. And Ty's very high on Minnesota this year. Ty's very high.
I am. I'm
Darius Taylor, baby.
Minnesota.
Yeah.
Yep.
Max Brosmer. New Hampshire transfer. Love it. We have
a saying on our show, Andy, that I clunkily started up that
horrible.
This is the year of bros before nose.
I hate it.
And by that, I mean, we need to see what Max Brosmer can do in that Minnesota offense, hopefully revitalize passing attack before we default to the nose of the past. Like we saw last year, right? They were going to build up the passing game before you know it. They ran the ball like 62% of the time. They were a very run-heavy offense. So I want to see Max Brosmer before I default to the
Ask
nose
Ty
of the
how
past.
he would feel if an FCS transfer were starting for Notre Dame, right? As long as it's for your team.
We're not here to
for
talk
mine.
about the past. We're here to talk about the future.
It is a very sneaky, great Thursday week 1 game.
Yes.
North Carolina at Minnesota. Very excited to watch that game. All right, let us move. Actually, since we mentioned North Carolina, let's go to the ACC. Let's 2 truths and a lie from the ACC. And this is all championship related. Florida State will win the ACC again. Clemson will not make the ACC title game. Miami will make the ACC title game.
I'm taking Florida State as the lie. Florida State repeating.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay.
You get the whole field. That's pretty good.
You get the whole field.
You get 16 teams.
I like a lot of what Florida State has on defense. Generally, my rubric for greatness is quarterback and defense. With what Florida State lost on its line, even with what it has coming back and, occupying their defensive line, I think DJU is fine. I do not trust DJU. On a high level, I would not feel great about a team. Like, I think he's a totally fine quarterback, but I don't think he is a championship caliber quarterback. And that is my bias. I've watched a lot of him at Clemson and Oregon State. I'm just not there. Whereas I can talk myself into the upside of Miami And you're saying Clemson missing the championship game?
Clemson missing would be the lie. So Clemson making it would be the truth in that situation, which is at this point a harder, it's a bolder take if you're saying they're going to make it.
I think I like Clemson more than Florida State in this moment.
Yeah. For me,
wow. In general.
Yeah, I do. Look, we just did a whole episode trying to zag about the Iowa offense, right? That let's not make fun of the Iowa offense. Let's try to understand it. And there is something to me about where I believe Clemson's defense will be this year. And I know that the issue has not been defense for Clemson, but I think as flawed as we can look at Clemson being with what they've done in the portal and not being able to figure out offense and receivers specifically, which is weird given Dabo's background, they've still won a ton of games recently. There is something still I like the continuity of Clemson. I think that is the
so does
secret
Dabo.
Sauce. Well, Dabo likes it too much, to be clear, but I still think continuity is the secret sauce to college football. And I can't fully buy Mario Cristobal, but I still like the upside. And I like Clemson a little bit more than Florida State in this moment.
Andy, the lie is that Clemson will not make the ACC title game. I am in on Clemson this year. I'm in on Miami. I think Miami's going to make the ACC.
You bought the stock that Dabo recommended?
I'm in. I'm buying too much here. I'm into Miami making the ACC title game. I can certainly see a world in which Florida State again wins the ACC, though I'm not betting on that. The lie to me, though, is Clemson not playing that title game. I am pretty high on them. I've got them in the game against Miami this year. I get that there is the narrative, as Dan alluded, that Dabo is not adapting. He's not using the portal. To be clear, that is definitely a long-term problem that he should probably see somebody about or talk to somebody about. Get a hall pass. Go out and get somebody to come in, one or two guys a year that can come in and plug some gaps. But I do think the receiver room will be better this season. I'm extremely excited about a guy like TJ Moore, the freshman wideout. He was compared to T. Higgins in his high school recruitment. To be clear, they need another T. Higgins to win some 50-50 balls and hopefully unlock that passing attack. I think this is going to be a better offense. I'm a little bit concerned that there's relative immaturity along that defensive line, but I think they'll be fine. I'm a little bit concerned that Cade Klubnik is going to show the same level of inconsistency we saw a year ago. But all things being equal, I'm still pretty high on this team. I like where they're at, and I think they're going to be playing in that ACC title game, probably against Miami.
So I think Florida State is going to win the ACC again.
Wow. I
do not think Clemson will make the ACC title game. My lie is Miami will make the ACC title game. And we talk about, I need to see it.
Yeah.
With the Iowa offense. For me, I need to see it with the Clemson receiving core with Jeff Scott not on the staff. Haven't seen it in years and years and years and years. I need to see it with Miami Mario Cristobal. They're coming to Gainesville. And their roster should be better than Florida's. They're 2.5-point favorites. I'm not that confident in them winning. You look at the rest of their schedule, they'll be favored or should be favored in every game other than Florida State. They should be 7-1 in the ACC. Will they be? I don't know. I need to see it. So the idea of Florida State matching up with Louisville or NC State or Virginia Tech in the ACC championship game seems more plausible at this point. And we'll see. Maybe Clemson is that team. Maybe Clemson is as good as you say they are. I would like to talk to you guys at 3:30 p.m. Eastern time on August 31st when the Georgia game is over. Most of us suspect the Georgia game will actually be over significantly before that. But
a lot of great teams get killed by Georgia to open the season and go on to super impressive things. Let's all be clear about that. Go Ducks. Okay?
Dan's an Oregon grad.
Yeah.
And we all remember what happened 2 years ago.
Yeah.
But yeah, that we'll talk. We'll reconvene via group text on August 31st to see how we feel after that Clemson Georgia game. Georgia, a 13.5-point favorite in that game. Let's go to the SEC.
Yeah.
While we're here, let's do it. Three statements about the SEC. 2 are true. 1 is a lie. They could all be lies. Let's be real here. But for the purposes of our exercise, 2 of these are true. 1 is a lie. Either Texas or Oklahoma will make the SEC title game.
Ooh.
Either Texas or Oklahoma will finish 500 or worse in league play. Georgia will lose 2 road games.
Man, this is brutal. This is a brutal one that you put in front of us, Sandy, and I'm not
The
going to forgive
most
you for
false.
it.
Yeah.
Georgia's not losing 2 road games. They're not losing 2 road games.
At Ole Miss, at Alabama, at Texas.
There will be plenty of landmines and plenty of opportunities for them to lose. Do you remember the conversation we had a year ago about Georgia's schedule, by the way? Do you remember how we looked at it and we were like, oh, that's a cakewalk. They're definitely going to be in the conversation later in the year. And they were, and it, didn't pan out the way they would have hoped. But nonetheless, kind of worked out, at least from a regular season scheduling standpoint. This year, it's the opposite. This year, that schedule is the 5th toughest, per our friend Bill Connolly over at ESPN, in the nation. So there are more than enough opportunities to go out there and lose. My issue with the statement, though, is if we're talking about Georgia, they're also 29th in returning production, which is an insane level of production from a really good team that returns in 2024. That's part of the reason why a lot of us, yours truly, liked Michigan to win the national title a year ago. You don't often see that level of returning production on a really good team. So from that standpoint alone, I could see Georgia dropping 1, but I think there's just too much organization around that program, too much talent on the depth chart that I'm going to sit here today and say they're going to lose 2 road games.
So what's the lie?
The lie is that Georgia's going to lose 2.
Oh, that's the lie. Okay, all right. So we're good, and we're good with. I feel like I've given people outs with the Texas and Oklahoma,
Right?
Because you've got they can't handle the grind of an SEC schedule. You've got that, but you've also got somebody could just come in like gangbusters, like Texas A&M did in its first year in the SEC. They were very good. Did not make the SEC title game, but was very good.
Yeah, I think you can talk yourself into Texas making the title game, right? Just because of their experience last year, what they did on the road against Nick Saban's final team at Alabama and making the playoff. Oklahoma is the bigger question, right? That you can squint and see Oklahoma finishing below 500 based on how tough their schedule is, some of the questions around their offensive line. I think their defense is going to be really fun, especially the back end of that defense. But the Georgia thing to me is still the lie. You would have to, if you believe Georgia's going to lose 2 road games this year, you have to be of the firm belief that Brock Bowers and Ladd McConkey specifically were such incredible safety valves for both Carson Beck and Stetson Bennett that losing both of them will create some sort of arrhythmic situation on offense that they can't figure out if they're down 4 with 3.5 minutes left, that they don't have a go-to guy in those big moments as good as, Oscar Delp or Colby Young or whoever steps up for the Georgia offense. You would have to believe that. And I don't. I think there's just too many ways for them to win. So I think that's the lie. Even with that schedule, I think that's previously on Georgia Ole Miss, they beat them by 73 points, right? Last year.
Yeah.
That's on the last episode. So we're going to have to close that gap significantly if you're going to believe in Ole Miss this year. Same quarterback, same head coach. And I like Ole Miss this year a good deal. But we've seen that chess match between Kirby Smart and Lane Kiffin, and it did not necessarily.
We've seen Georgia and Alabama. Now Nick Saban's not there.
But
we've seen Georgia and Alabama too. And do we not believe Texas has one of the better rosters in the country?
I think we do. We'll see on the defensive line. We'll see. That's
what I'm saying is these teams are going to be very close to Georgia. It's not really a knock against Georgia.
Fair.
It is the fact that Georgia has to play these monsters on the road and nobody else has to do anything like that. Yes, Florida's got a really tough schedule. Yes, Mississippi State has a tough schedule. Georgia Tech got screwed in the ACC if we're talking about schedule difficulty. But nobody else has a road gauntlet like this. And actually, even though in its styles make fight sense, like Georgia, of course Georgia's going to beat Kentucky because Kentucky's just trying to beat Georgia, but without as good of players as Georgia has. In fact, starting several of Georgia's players who couldn't start at Georgia.
Right.
I'm not worried about that one, but at Kentucky's not an easy game.
No. Well,
it's easy for Georgia.
Yeah, I was going to say it's easier for Georgia than most.
Yeah.
Yeah, when you look at this, I still think, and I go back to all my Breaking Bad references, that like Georgia's still the one who knocks, right? That like if you're saying who's more worried, Steve Sarkisian or Kirby Smart, it's Steve Sarkisian. Steve Sarkisian is on a losing streak to a Pac-12 team right now, and I love the Pac-12 and rest in peace, but goes down to Washington and with a superior
That's
roster.
a Big Ten team, Dan.
It's a Big
I don't know if
Ten
you
team
heard.
now. At the time, a Pac-12
Did you check the
team.
medal count?
I know, that's true. The Big Ten Network is airing like classic Big Ten games, and it's like the 1997 Civil War or whatever, which is kind of funny. Yeah, I still think Georgia's the one who instills more fear, and there is something about Steve Sarkisian in big games that gives me pause in this, and that's going to be an enormous game. And it's relatively early, right? The Georgia-Texas game in the schedule?
No,
it's halfway through. Okay.
Mid-season, yeah.
And they have a bye before the cocktail party, I believe.
They do. They have a bye after the Texas game. So,
it's not a horrible time in their schedule. Yeah, I still think, until proven otherwise, Georgia's just won close games, won big games. We call them crockpot games, where they just slowly pull away and slowly cook an opponent. Like, I don't know. I think they're built to withstand when they've recruited like this and they get the portal guys that they've gotten like this.
Well, I'm very excited about this because I do think the SEC is going to be very different. The championship game, when the Texas or Oklahoma make the SEC title game, I feel like that's the easiest lie for me to take.
Yeah.
If I'm going to say Georgia's going to lose 2 road games, which I'm not convinced of that, but I do think it's a real possibility, much more than you guys do. And I will say this: I think Texas, Ole Miss, or Tennessee makes the SEC title game because of the way their schedules shake out.
Yeah.
I think the other teams have much, like Alabama, Georgia, their road is going to be very difficult.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's never been a better year to sort of be Texas entering into a new conference. And I actually felt this way about USC too, right? With USC schedule, UCLA, Washington, missing Oregon, like that's a great advantage situation. And when you look at where the SEC is this year, new coach at Alabama, still big questions about how much better LSU's defense can get. What is Texas A&M going to look like in year one? Like, it feels more wide open than I think it looks on its face. So I don't hate that.
Speaking of championship games, the one that I feel like is the most unpredictable, because the league is the most unpredictable, is the Big 12. Yeah. So let me give you 3 Big 12 statements, and let's have some fun with this, because I do think this is going to be the biggest choose your own adventure league that we've seen in a long time. So statement number 1, Colorado will make a bowl game, because I just got to get your hot take on that. Mm-hmm. Statement 2, at least one of the following teams will make the Big 12 title game: Kansas State, Utah, or Oklahoma State. Statement 3, at least one of the following teams will make the Big 12 title game: UCF, TCU, West Virginia.
All right. So Colorado will make a bowl game. That is true.
Fact.
At least one of Kansas State, Utah, and Oklahoma State will make the Big 12 title. That is also true. I think it's going to be Utah and Oklahoma State personally, but there's a case for K-State as well. That's also true. The one that is not true is either UCF, West Virginia, or TCU making that title game. All 3 teams are worthy for being in this question. I understand why you put them there. Also, bear in mind, the reason that this is kind of a controversial thing to even talk about, West Virginia is a 6.5 over/under. Both TCU and UCF are 7.5 over/under. So there are serious questions about all 3 of these schools. The good news for West Virginia, for as much as I like West Virginia and their offense, and I think their defense can improve as well, the good news is they don't play Utah, which I think stands to benefit them. The bad news is they play literally everybody else. All right. So I'm kind of throwing them out of this conversation.
I also intentionally left a kind of co-favorite out of those.
Yes.
For a reason. I did not put Arizona in there for a reason. It was more to give myself some wiggle room.
That's right. No, I noticed that as well. The UCF thing, I mean, I have baggage with Ted Roof running Penn State's defense. go back a decade. I never got over that. So the fact that they bring him in now to fix the defense, even though he's got a track record for doing well against the run, I'm out on UCF, though I think they're going to be loaded on offense. And TCU, I just don't know directionally which way that program is headed. There's not a lot that I look at on TCU and I say, I'm afraid of that guy, or I'm afraid of that unit in particular. So for me, too many questions about those three teams. I think that's the lie.
I'm going to agree with Ty, but like I have been prone to being seduced by KJ Jefferson, especially with a good offensive mind. I don't know, having the receivers that he'll have this year at UCF is definitely a more advantaged place than he's been at Arkansas these past couple of years. And so I can squint and talk myself in, but the back half of that schedule is pretty brutal if you don't have a defense in place. I think 5 of their 6 final games are legit challenging. So yeah, what do we have here? Iowa State on the road, Arizona State not, but at West Virginia, Utah. So 4 of those.
You're at West Virginia and at Iowa State, both tough. You got to play Arizona. Colorado comes to you. Utah comes to you. Yeah, if UCF gets there, they earned it.
Yeah,
not only do they earn it, but I think it signifies that the defense does improve. Let me say this about UCF, regardless of whether they make this title game, that schedule that we just saw, that figures to be a hell of a TV show because their offense is going to be loaded. It's still a Gus Malzahn offense who knows how to work with the likes of a KJ Jefferson type and with exciting ground options like RJ Harvey. They're going to put up a ton of points. It stands to reason they could play in a lot of shootouts this year. It'll be good TV. It might be frustrating if you're a UCF fan, but they will be in a lot of those games, and they'll at least make it fun to watch from afar.
Could be the nail in the Billy Napier coffin as well.
Well, visit from Coach Prime in Orlando to trip to Gainesville the following week. A lot going on in that 8-day stretch for UCF.
I think, by the way, regarding Colorado, I think they're going to be improved. There's always a chance, right, that Colorado completely collapses. I don't think they have the depth to have a crazy improvement this year, but I think they'll have enough offensive pop. The competence on the offensive line can only get better. Shedeur Sanders, one of the most sacked quarterbacks in college football last year, added legit talent on the defensive line. I don't think they have the depth, right? I don't think they have the star power at as many position groups as you need to win like 9 games, even in like what seems to be a pretty wide open Big 12. But yeah, one of my best bets of the year is I think Colorado is going to be great against North Dakota State in week 1. And people are like talking to themselves like, oh, North Dakota State, like, I don't know. They lost their head coach. Their defense took a pretty big step back last year. Like North Dakota State isn't where they were under.
Yeah, the David Braun leaving before last season, Matt Ince leaving before that matters.
I agree.
Also, South Dakota State is the team that's been winning
Go Jacks.
in the SES. Now, they lost a lot, too. They play Oklahoma State week 1. That's a fun game, too.
Lost their offensive coordinator to David Braun.
Exactly. All right. Here, let's in general, the conferences, because so much is changing with the conferences. So this one will be fun. A team will win a conference in its first year in its new league. The national champion will not play in a conference title game. I see Ty's eyes getting wide there.
Go Irish. Continue.
At least 2 power conference title games will be rematches of regular season games.
Oh, man.
This may all be true, by the way.
Yeah, I was going to say.
Possible they're all true.
All 3 are very possible. I'm really high on Utah winning the Big 12. I think there's a chance we get 3 rematches in conference title games, those being Georgia, Texas in the SEC, Oregon, Ohio State in the Big 10, Utah, Oklahoma State in the Big 12. So just by process of elimination, Andy, the national champion not playing for a conference title game, I think is my answer. I would just like to emphasize this point, though, more to the case that all of these are very possible. If we just use like the NFL as a rough example, the NFL added wild cards to its playoff system back in the 70s. A wild card team has won the Super Bowl 7 times.
Right.
Also, there have been 11 entrants in the Super Bowl from that wild card round of the playoffs. So if we use that as any kind of guide, not winning a thing, but still finding a way into the playoff, you can have a lot of success. I look at that matchup, that 5-12 matchup in the very early part of the playoff, in the first round of the playoff, where it's presumably a group of 5 team against the next best power conference team. I could see that team going on a bit of a run, beating the G5 team, beating the top 4 team in the country, and finding their way into.
Well, remember, number 4 might not be the 4th ranked team in the country. Number 4 could be the 12th ranked team for all we know.
Exactly.
Yeah,
so that's an advantageous spot, depending on who the number 5 seeded team is in this playoff. So again, process of elimination. I'm going to say national champion will not play in a conference championship game is
well,
the thing that
and you mentioned seven Super Bowl champions from the wild cards since the 70s. That actually tells you that this probably is the lie. The national champion will not play in a conference title game, like, because the teams that make the SEC and the Big Ten title games, and that's where most of us are presuming the national champion will come from, like they were the best of those very difficult conferences. So the chances of them winning the national title are much better still. So this is but it will be fascinating to watch that all play out, because we don't yet know how any of it's going to play out. Like I said earlier, we still don't have the tiebreakers, which they have to tell us at some point in the next week and a half.
Yeah, and by the way, just with deeper conferences, right? Like you mentioned, like a potential like Oregon, Ohio State, Iowa 3-way menage, whatever at the top, that you can have a really good team not make the conference title game because we just have deeper conferences. And the other wild card here, no pun intended, is injury, right? That you could have, like Will Howard gets injured near the end of the year and they lose something dumb and they don't end up there. But with extra time, right, to get healthy and to figure things out, Ohio State goes 10-2. They don't make the championship game, but he gets healthy and is a difference maker as they win in an opening round playoff game and get hot at the right time. It's not exactly baseball, like with the getting hot at the right time. It's, do you have the depth to weather a deeper playoff? But some of those teams, at the top absolutely do, even if they don't play in the conference title game and get a week off to get healthier, not playing in that conference title game.
Well, and I brought up the Texas A&M 2012 team. Like, that was a team that grew and developed over the course of the year. You didn't want to play them at the end of the year.
Right.
They lost their 2 games at the beginning of the year and, beat the eventual national champ on the road. Nobody would have wanted to see them in the playoff. Like 2007 Georgia, nobody would have wanted to see them in the playoff. So that's where it gets interesting, because you can grow and change over the year as well. Let's go to the Heisman Trophy. Let's do the Heisman Trophy, because this is the dynamics of this has changed a little bit. The Heisman Trophy winner will be a transfer quarterback. A true freshman will be a Heisman Trophy finalist.
Ooh.
The Heisman Trophy winner will play in the Big Ten or the SEC.
Man. Okay. So the true freshman one, I think you're basically banking on Dylan Raiola, Jeremiah Smith. Am I missing
Cam Coleman,
somebody?
maybe?
Yeah. Transfer QB is not terribly difficult because of, I guess, Dylan Gabriel, Will Howard. Like, there's enough of those names at big schools that will get enough attention that if they're great, everybody will see it.
But what we don't have this year is that second year in the system transfer. Like last year, the 3 finalists were all second year in the system transfers.
Yeah.
And we don't have the obvious ones of those, like, because that's like Peyton Thorne, Graham Mertz this year. It's not as obvious. Now, the Dylan Gabriel thing, because Dylan Gabriel was one of those guys last year, put up huge numbers at Oklahoma. I assume he's going to put up huge numbers at Oregon. So he could be the transfer QB who wins the Heisman.
Yeah. And they'll have, you go through, there's a million players here to consider, but especially that first half of the year, if you have a signature win before like mid-October, and you're at a big place, you're going to be on everybody's radar. So I think the lie is going to be a true freshman being a Heisman finalist, just because I think the barrier for something like that is too tall to do it over 12, 13 games, that it's so obvious you just have to invite this person to New York as a 17, 18-year-old.
Yeah. I am not above betting on Dylan Raiola at 90-1. Just a few shekels, Andy. Like, just
sure.
Those are tall odds. Or Julian saying at 100-1, maybe Will Howard goes down. I hope he doesn't, but that would be the scenario that would bring that into play. I agree with Dan. I think that's got to be the lie of these 3 things here. The Big Ten and the SEC, it stands to reason are going to be in the greatest focus this season. Probably will have the most teams in the playoff this season. Lord knows there are enough options at transfer quarterback, like Dan said, but not as many names that we could truly consider for that true freshman as a Heisman finalist.
Is it J.J. Smith, by the way, or Jeremiah Smith?
His friends call him JJ.
Okay.
His
I just wanna
name
get it
on his
right.
birth certificate is Jeremiah.
Yeah.
We have not gotten a ruling from him on what he'd prefer.
Okay.
But the folks who know him call him JJ. So he's going to be really good.
Oh, yeah.
That's the one I'm excited about. But the question is, do we figure, like, if he's the difference, if he's the key, and I don't know if that's going to be the case because they obviously have Emeka Buka still and Carnell Tate. But like with Devontae Smith, we correctly realized in 2020 he was the reason at Alabama. I don't know that we realized that with Kyle Pitts at Florida same year, even though that was also the case.
Mm-hmm.
But Devontae Smith was the reason. And that can happen with a receiver. We just,
Devontae Smith was 4 years in or whatever, though.
Yeah, exactly. And he had led Alabama in receiving the year before, despite other first rounders being in the receiver room.
Yeah.
So yes, it's going to be very interesting to see how that shakes out. I think it might be the transfer QB one, might be the lie. Dylan Gabriel is the one that feels obvious there. But you also have a year where you have like Carson Beck, who is a homegrown guy. Garrett Nussmeier waits his turn, takes over to LSU, that sort of thing. So there's a good chance it could be somebody who hasn't transferred yet.
Nico. I'm so
Nico Iamaleava.
Yeah.
All right. One more 2 truths and a lie before I let Dan and Ty go. 2 truths and a tie. And of course, we saved the first 12-team playoff for last. 5 SEC teams will make the playoff.
Wow.
4 Big Ten teams will make the playoff. 2 ACC teams will make the playoff.
Andy, I'm going to call out your graphic here.
Uh-oh.
I see Michigan.
That's based on my post-spring top 25. So that's got 5 SEC teams in there.
Yeah.
I see Michigan in there at number 8.
You sure do.
Michigan is not making this playoff.
Oh,
They are not making this
Clip
playoff.
that, River. Clip it.
This is me saying that 4 Big Ten teams are not making this playoff. All right. Go back to what I said before. I'm on Miami. I'm on Clemson out of the ACC. I think it's possible.
You got 2. Okay.
I think it's possible we get 5 SEC teams sneaking into the playoff. That 5th team is who? Probably LSU or Tennessee, a team
Missouri,
of that ilk.
somebody. Yeah.
Somebody, right? What I don't see, though, is the 4th team from the Big Ten making it in. When we talked through our Big Ten preview on our show, and we did our contender tiers, and I'm sure you've done this as well, there's a pretty good drop-off after you go through Ohio State and Oregon and Penn State and Michigan. Those are your top 4. The next best are probably USC, who we talked about USC. Are they going to finish over
Iowa
500?
schedule.
Yeah.
Or Iowa, right?
Yeah.
But this one's the lie for me because I don't think Michigan is getting in. Not with Texas on the schedule, not with Oregon on the schedule, not with Ohio State on the schedule. I think all 3 of those teams are better than Michigan. Michigan will be very good. They will have a very good defense. They will find a way to win a bunch of games. But I think we start the conversation at 9-3 given that schedule. And I don't think 9-3 is getting you in the playoff. So mark me down as 4 Big Ten teams making the playoff as my lie.
I think it's the 5 SEC one. I think because the SEC, I mean, look, all of these conferences at this moment are wide open, but there is something, this is the cynical part of my brain for sure. But the narrative after the playoff selection last year was that the playoff is rigged for the SEC specifically, right? That Florida State doesn't make it in and everything is rigged for the SEC. I don't think that's true. But I think if the committee has an opportunity to course correct on the margins, I don't think they want to give a team 5 playoff berths in year 1 of an expanded playoff, especially when it's going to 14 anyway in a couple of years. And we're not going to be having that same conversation in the same way about how many teams from this conference, how many teams from that conference as it gets bigger and bigger. So that to me is going to be my cynical lie that the SEC is going to get 5 teams in. And whether it's the Big 12 getting a second, whether the ACC getting a second, I think there is going to be an unspoken or a secretly spoken edict to spread the wealth as much as possible.
See, I don't think they think that way.
Oh,
I don't think they vote
it's a
that
very
way.
cynical view, but yeah.
Yeah. I think it's 2 ACC teams making the playoff. I think that's the lie. I just
Wow.
they are stronger at the top. Like I can see that over 2 Big 12 teams because I can see it being Florida State, Miami, Florida State, Clemson, Miami, NC State, Florida State. However you want to divvy it up, I can see that it being a fairly top-heavy league that may have 2 teams that get the ACC championship game and they're both 11-1, or one's 11-1, one's 10-2, and the 10-2 team wins, getting the automatic bid, and the 11-1 team is an at-large, or the 11-2 team is an at-large. I can see that. But I can also see a situation where there's a really good team that's like 11-1 that plays a 9-3 team in the conference championship game, beats them, and that's all there is to it.
Right.
So we'll find out. But I think it's the 2 ACC teams making the playoff is the lie, the tie, if you will.
Very confusing.
Gentlemen, this has been wonderful.
Oh, pleasure is all ours. All of our wrong
I don't know
answers
that we solved
felt good.
anything.
No.
But I am more pumped up than I was before, and I was already very pumped up because this is just going to be so exciting to see all of this play out in real time.
My brain is scrambled and the season hasn't even started yet, thinking about different possibilities and combinations of teams that I have to be thinking about all of the time. So this is a really good primer. Thank you.
I went through when you sent these questions to us a little bit in advance, Andy, and in the notes app on my phone, I was trying to jot down who my 12 playoff teams are going to be, with the knowledge of the rules and who gets in and who doesn't. And I kept coming up with 14. And just when I thought I had 12, I was like, oh, I still have 13. It's really hard to get, like, we know generally who the teams are that are going to be part of this conversation. But I would encourage everybody out there to go do the same thing on your phone, open up the notes app and try to list out the 12. It's a little bit harder as you get towards the bottom than you'd think.
Do the Ralph Russo game. So he sent this to me last week when the AP poll came out, and it's fascinating because it's based on, the last 10 years of college football playoff final rankings versus the AP preseason poll. The best way to figure it out based on how these things have shaken out through the years is you take 4 of the 5 AP preseason top 25, 2 from 6 through 10, 2 from 11 through 20, 1 from 1 from 21 through 25, and 3 unranked. You do that, things start getting real weird real fast.
Yeah, indeed.
So,
like that.
There's my projection based on that. I've got Iowa in the playoff. I got West Virginia, UCF, Tennessee. Like it gets crazy.
Wouldn't that be awesome though to have a UCF in the playoffs, right?
It'd be amazing.
After years of trying to shoulder their way into the power conference conversation to get in, then to get, hey, who knows? Stranger things have happened, and we know the Big 12 is wide open. So I'm not rooting against. I don't think it's likely, but I think just the possibility that we're talking about teams like UCF, App State, like schools that typically are not part of this conversation, now being part of it, I think
Notre
that in
Dame.
and of itself, Notre Dame, these schools being part of that conversation is reason enough to feel energized about the new year.
Yes, with apologies to Kevin Garnett. Anything is possible, gentlemen. Thank you so much. I'll be seeing you on your show very soon.
Come on over.
That is the great Dan Rubenstein and Ty Hildenbrandt, the founders of the Solid Verbal Podcast, the pioneers of this entire genre, these college football shows. They started this. We're just trying to carry it on, though I will recommend you listen to their show as well, watch their show as well. There's room for all of us here. This is going to be a fun season. This is going to be so much fun. I mean, when I get done with this show, I'm going to interview somebody in Dublin. That's right. Jeff Cameron from War Chant, our friend Jeff Cameron, covers Florida State. He's in Dublin already. We're going to talk to him for tomorrow's show about the Seminoles as they prepare to face Georgia Tech in Ireland on Saturday in a real game. We're so close. We're so close. By the way, as we're planning on things that are happening often in the future, let's get those Dear Andy questions in. Thursday is a Dear Andy show. We also have a Dear Andy column for those of you who want to goof off at work in a more silent fashion. So get me those questions Andy_Staples on X, Andy_Staples on Instagram, Andy Staples on 3 at gmail.com for a particularly epic question, or if you don't want to ask it on social media, or if you want to send me a video. All of these are options available to you. I know you have great questions because you give them to me every week, and it's the most fun day of my week on Thursdays when I get to answer those questions. So send them in, and get ready, guys. We're only a scant 4.5 days away from actual football. Right there. We'll talk to you tomorrow.